My husband tried to recreate his ex-girlfriend using me. Now he is an ex too. My husband Vincent gifted me everything that his ex-girlfriend Tara had, including her exact perfume, the same leather jacket in the same color, and even identical jewelry pieces like he was trying to transform me into her replacement. For my birthday, he gave me the specific perfume Tara wore, and when I mentioned it smelled familiar. He said it was a classic scent that suited elegant women. I found out from his sister that it was Tara's signature fragrance she'd worn every day for the 3 years they dated. For Christmas, Vincent bought me a red leather jacket that I thought was thoughtful, until I saw old photos on his computer of Tara wearing the exact same jacket from the exact same store. When I asked about it, he said red leather was timeless, and I was overthinking a coincidence. For our anniversary, he gave me a tennis bracelet that looked familiar because I'd seen it in a photo on his nightstand before we moved in together, the one where Tara was wearing it at his cousin's wedding. He said tennis bracelets were traditional anniversary gifts, and I was being paranoid about normal jewelry choices. He bought me the same brand of running shoes Tara wore, the same style of sunglasses, even the same haircut appointment at the salon Tara used to go to. When I confronted Vincent about deliberately buying me Tara's things, he said I was being insecure, and these were just popular items that many women owned. He said Tara had good taste, and if I happened to like similar things, that showed I had good taste too. He actually said I should be flattered that I reminded him of someone he'd loved, because it meant we were compatible. He said men had types and I was lucky to fit his preferences instead of him settling for someone completely different. He told me I was creating problems where none existed, and maybe therapy would help with my jealousy issues about his past. The worst part was when Vincent bought me lingerie for Valentine's Day that was identical to what Tara had worn in intimate photos I'd accidentally seen in his email. When I recognized it and confronted him, he said all lingerie looked the same, and I was sexualizing a thoughtful gift. He said normal wives appreciated when their husbands bought them nice things instead of investigating the origins of every present. That's when I discovered Vincent had been following Tara's social media with a fake account and buying me everything she posted about owning or wanting. Her wish list became my gift list, and her style became my mandatory wardrobe. He was systematically turning me into a copy of the woman who dumped him for being controlling and obsessive. I decided Vincent needed to understand what it felt like to be dressed as someone else's ex. I started buying him everything my ex-boyfriend Paul had owned, starting with Paul's cologne that Vincent hated but now had to wear because I'd thrown out all his other fragrances. I bought him the same clothes Paul wore, including band shirts for groups Vincent despised and cargo shorts he said looked ridiculous. I got him Paul's exact watch, Paul's favorite shoes, even Paul's hair gel, and told Vincent he needed to style his hair the same way. When Vincent protested, I said he was being insecure, and these were just popular men's items that happened to be similar to what Paul owned. I signed Vincent up for Paul's gym and bought him the same protein powder, pre-workout, and supplements Paul used. I redecorated our bedroom with Paul's favorite sports team memorabilia and bought Vincent jerseys to wear on game days, even though he hated sports. I replaced Vincent's car accessories with the same ones Paul had, including fuzzy dice and racing stripes that Vincent found tacky. For Vincent's birthday, I threw him a party with Paul's favorite theme, Paul's favorite food, and even hired Paul's favorite band to play. When Vincent complained, I said he was overthinking coincidences and being paranoid about normal party choices. I gave him Paul's favorite books, movies, and video games for every occasion, insisting he needed to expand his interests. The breaking point came when I invited Paul to dinner, and had Vincent dressed exactly like him, from the same brand of jeans to the identical baseball cap. Paul noticed immediately and asked why Vincent was dressed like his twin. I explained that Vincent believed in copying ex's styles because it showed compatibility and good taste. Paul laughed and told Vincent he looked ridiculous trying to be someone else. Vincent was humiliated and finally understood how I'd felt for 2 years of being dressed as his ex-girlfriend. But I wasn't done yet because I'd found Tara's contact information and invited her to see what Vincent had been doing. She was horrified to learn he'd been buying his wife identical items to turn me into her replacement. Tara's eyes locked onto the perfume bottle sitting on the side table, then moved to the tennis bracelet on my wrist, then to the red leather jacket draped over my chair. Her face went pale and she took a step back like she'd seen something terrible. She turned to Vincent and her voice came out sharp and angry when she asked how long he'd been doing this to me. Vincent shrank back against the wall and his mouth opened, but no words came out at first. I watched him get smaller under her stare and felt a strange satisfaction seeing someone else finally understand what I'd been living with. Tara walked closer to me and reached out to touch the jacket sleeve, then pulled her hand back fast. She said she owned that exact jacket and bought it from a boutique in the city 3 years ago. She pointed at my bracelet and said Vincent gave her the same one for their second anniversary. Her voice got louder as she listed every single thing she recognized, from my earrings to my shoes to even the way my hair was styled. Vincent finally found his voice and tried to say it was all just coincidence, that these were popular items lots of women owned. Tara cut him off mid-sentence and said this was exactly why she left him 2 years ago. She said he could never accept her as her own person with her own choices and boundaries. She told him he always wanted to control how she looked, and what she wore, and who she talked to. Vincent's face turned red and he started making excuses, but Tara wasn't listening anymore. Paul had been watching this whole thing unfold from across the room, and he finally spoke up. He said this was the creepiest thing he'd ever seen in his life, and Vincent needed serious help. The dinner party I'd carefully planned fell apart right there. Paul grabbed his jacket and made some excuse about having to leave early for work tomorrow. He looked uncomfortable and kept glancing at Vincent like he was scared to be in the same room. Tara followed Paul toward the door and told me to call her if I needed anything. Vincent tried to stop them, but they were already gone. The front door closed, and suddenly it was just me and Vincent standing in our dining room with half-eaten food on the table. Vincent's shoulders started shaking, and he put his face in his hands. He sank down onto one of the dining chairs and started crying in a way I'd never seen before. He admitted he never got over Tara leaving him and said it destroyed him when she walked away. He said he thought if he could recreate what they had together, he could fix whatever went wrong in that relationship. He looked up at me with tears running down his face and said he loved me, but he knew now that he'd been trying to turn me into someone else. I stood there listening to him confess, and realized our entire marriage was built on his fantasy of getting Tara back. Every gift, every compliment, every time he said he loved me, he was really talking to her ghost. I felt sick to my stomach thinking about how I'd spent 2 years being someone's replacement without knowing it. I told Vincent I was done being his project and his dress-up doll. I said I was moving out that night and not coming back. Vincent jumped up and grabbed my hands and begged me to stay. He promised he'd get therapy and change and be better. He said he'd throw away everything he bought me and start fresh. But I'd already wasted 2 years being someone else, and I needed to remember who I actually was before I met him. I pulled my hands away and went upstairs to pack. Vincent followed me and kept talking, but I stopped listening. I grabbed a suitcase from the closet and started throwing my essential stuff inside. I left behind all the clothes Vincent bought me, all the jewelry, all the accessories. I only packed things I'd owned before we got married or bought myself. The relief of leaving Tara's perfume on the dresser felt bigger than I expected. I called my friend and asked if I could stay at her place for a while. She said yes immediately and told me to come over right away. Vincent stood in the bedroom doorway watching me pack and crying. He asked where I was going, and I said it didn't matter because it was away from him. I zipped up my suitcase and walked past him down the stairs. He followed me to the front door, still begging and making promises. I got in my car and drove to my friend's apartment without looking back. She opened the door and hugged me and didn't ask questions when she saw I'd been crying. I took a shower that night and scrubbed off every trace of Tara's perfume. I put on my own old pajamas that Vincent always said looked sloppy. I crawled into my friend's guest bed and felt like I could breathe properly for the first time in months. The next morning I woke up to my phone ringing. It was Vincent's sister calling. She said she needed to apologize for not saying something sooner about the perfume. She admitted she thought it was weird when Vincent gave me Tara's signature scent, but she didn't realize the full extent of what he was doing. She said if she'd known he was buying me everything Tara owned, she would have warned me before I married him. She told me their whole family was shocked, and their mom was forcing Vincent to see a therapist. I thanked her for calling and said I appreciated her honesty even if it came late. After we hung up, I looked up divorce attorneys online. I found one with good reviews and called her office. The secretary scheduled me an appointment for that afternoon. I sat in the attorney's office and told her everything from the perfume to the lingerie to the fake social media account. She listened with her eyebrows getting higher and higher. When I finished, she said what Vincent did was a form of psychological abuse called identity erasure. She said she'd seen similar cases before where partners tried to control and reshape their spouse's entire identity. She explained we had strong grounds for divorce and she could help me document everything. I felt validated hearing a professional confirm that what happened to me wasn't normal or okay. Over the next few days, Vincent sent me dozens of texts. He said he loved me and didn't mean to hurt me. He said he understood now what he did wrong and wanted to make it right. He sent long paragraphs about how much he missed me and how empty the house felt without me. I showed all the messages to my attorney during our next meeting. She told me to save everything as documentation of his patterns. She said the obsessive texting showed he still couldn't respect my boundaries even after I left. Then Tara reached out to me through social media. She sent a message asking if I was okay, and saying she felt terrible about what Vincent did. She shared that Vincent did similar things to her during their relationship. She said he tried to make her dress and act like his high school girlfriend. She sent me photos of herself from back then wearing clothes that looked nothing like her usual style. She said Vincent would get upset if she didn't wear what he picked out or style her hair the way he wanted. She told me she finally left when she realized he didn't actually love her. He loved the idea of recreating his first relationship. I suggested we meet at a coffee shop near her work. Tara arrived wearing jeans and a sweater that looked nothing like the outfits Vincent had bought me. We sat down with our drinks and I pulled out my phone to show her photos of myself wearing her exact clothes. She stared at the screen and her hand shook slightly as she scrolled through the images. She pointed at one photo and told me she still owned that exact red jacket. She said Vincent gave it to her for her birthday 3 years ago. I showed her another photo of me in the tennis bracelet, and she lifted her wrist to show me she was wearing the same one. Vincent had bought us matching jewelry. Tara set down her coffee and told me Vincent kept a box of photos under his bed during their relationship. She said the photos were of his high school girlfriend, and he would look at them when he thought she wasn't paying attention. She told me he would get upset if she styled her hair differently than the girl in the photos. He wanted her to keep it long and straight because that's how his ex wore it. She tried cutting it short once, and Vincent didn't speak to her for 3 days. I felt sick realizing Vincent had done this to someone before me. Tara apologized for not reaching out when she heard through mutual friends that Vincent got married. She said she wanted to warn me but didn't know how to contact me without seeming jealous or bitter. She worried I would think she was just a crazy ex trying to cause problems. I told her I understood completely and wished someone had told me before I married him. She said she felt guilty for not trying harder to find me. We talked for 2 hours comparing notes about Vincent's behavior. She told me he would buy her clothes and get angry if she didn't wear them. He tracked what she posted on social media and bought himself matching items. When she broke up with him, he showed up at her apartment for weeks begging her to come back. She had to threaten a restraining order before he finally stopped. 3 days after meeting Tara, Vincent showed up at my friend's apartment. I was eating breakfast when the doorbell rang. My friend looked through the peephole and told me it was Vincent. She asked if I wanted her to send him away. I said yes and stayed in the kitchen while she opened the door. I heard Vincent's voice asking to talk to me. My friend told him I didn't want to see him. He said he just needed 5 minutes to explain. She said I made it clear I would only speak to him with my attorney present. Vincent's voice got louder and he asked why I was being so dramatic about a few gifts. My friend told him he needed to leave or she would call the police. He didn't move. She pulled out her phone and started dialing. Vincent finally backed away from the door, but he didn't get in his car. I watched from the window as he sat on the curb outside the building. He stayed there for an hour checking his phone and looking up at the windows. My friend called the police non-emergency line and reported him for refusing to leave. A patrol car showed up and talked to Vincent. He got in his car and drove away. My friend hugged me and said I made the right choice leaving him. That afternoon, I called my attorney and scheduled an appointment to file for divorce. The attorney's office smelled like old books and coffee. I sat across from her desk and signed the divorce papers. She explained we were filing based on irreconcilable differences and emotional abuse. She said Vincent's systematic attempt to change my identity could support claims of psychological harm. The courts took this kind of manipulation seriously. She asked if I had documentation of what Vincent did. I showed her the photos of me wearing Tara's exact outfits and jewelry. I showed her screenshots of Vincent's fake social media account following Tara. I showed her the credit card statements with purchases from the same stores Tara shopped at. The attorney took copies of everything and said we had a strong case. She filed the papers that day. Vincent would be served within 48 hours. 2 days later, Vincent's mother called me. Her voice sounded strained when she asked what happened to my marriage. I took a deep breath and told her everything. I explained about the perfume and the leather jacket and the tennis bracelet. I told her about the fake social media account and how Vincent bought me everything Tara owned. I explained how he was trying to turn me into his ex-girlfriend. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Finally, she said she needed to tell me something. She admitted Vincent had always had trouble with boundaries and letting go. She said when he was in high school, he dated a girl who broke up with him to go to college. Vincent followed her to the same college even though he had been accepted somewhere better. The girl had to get campus security involved. His mother said she thought Vincent had grown out of that behavior. She apologized for not seeing the warning signs with me. She said she should have said something when she noticed I started dressing differently after the wedding. I thanked her for being honest and hung up. That night, I called my own parents. My mother answered and asked how I was doing. I told her I filed for divorce. She gasped and asked what happened. I explained the whole story from the beginning. I told her about Vincent buying me Tara's perfume and clothes and jewelry. I told her about the fake social media account and how he was systematically erasing my identity. My mother started crying. She said she thought Vincent was such a good husband. She remembered how attentive he was and how he always bought me nice gifts. She didn't realize he was turning me into someone else. My father got on the phone and said if he had known what Vincent was doing, he never would have walked me down the aisle. He asked if I needed anything. I said I just needed their support. They told me I could move home anytime I wanted. I thanked them but said I needed to figure out who I was on my own first. The next week, I started therapy. My therapist's office had comfortable chairs and soft lighting. I sat down and told her why I was there. She listened without interrupting as I explained about Vincent and Tara and the 2 years I spent being molded into someone else. When I finished, she said what Vincent did was called coercive control. It was a form of abuse where someone gradually takes over another person's identity and choices. She said Vincent disguised his control as gift-giving and attentiveness. Most people wouldn't recognize it as abuse because it looked like love from the outside. She explained that abusers often isolate their victims by changing how they dress and act until the victim doesn't recognize themselves anymore. I felt validated hearing a professional confirm what I experienced was real and harmful. She said we would work together to help me rediscover who I was before Vincent. 6 weeks after I filed for divorce, Vincent agreed to mediation. My attorney said mediation would be faster and cheaper than going to court. We met at a neutral office with a professional mediator. Vincent sat across the table from me looking tired. The mediator explained we were there to discuss divorce terms and property division. Vincent immediately said this was all a misunderstanding about gift preferences. He told the mediator I was overreacting to normal presents. My attorney slid a folder across the table containing photos of me in Tara's exact outfits. The mediator opened it and looked through each picture. Her expression changed as she saw the evidence. She asked Vincent directly if he was trying to recreate his ex-girlfriend through me. Vincent's face turned red and he said I was twisting everything. The mediator asked him to explain the fake social media account. Vincent said he just wanted to know how Tara was doing. The mediator asked why he bought me the same items Tara posted about. Vincent didn't answer. I watched Vincent's hands shake as the mediator kept asking questions. She wanted to know how long he had been following Tara online. She asked if he understood why buying me identical items was inappropriate. Vincent's voice cracked when he finally admitted the truth. He said after Tara left him, he felt like he lost his perfect partner. He said when he met me, he saw an opportunity to have that relationship back. He thought if he could recreate what they had, everything would work out this time. The mediator sat back in her chair looking disturbed. She said Vincent needed to understand he had been trying to turn me into someone else instead of loving me for who I was. Vincent put his head in his hands. My attorney said this confession would make the divorce proceedings very straightforward. The mediator agreed, closed her folder and told Vincent he needed to get help before entering another relationship. The mediator scheduled follow-up sessions to finalize everything. Vincent signed the papers that afternoon without arguing. My attorney called me that night to say the process would move quickly, now that he'd admitted everything in front of a witness. I spent the next week sorting through my things at the friend's apartment where I was staying. Most of my clothes felt wrong because Vincent had influenced so many of my choices over the past 2 years. I kept finding items that reminded me of Tara and threw them in garbage bags. My friend helped me pack up the last of my belongings from the house while Vincent was at work. We filled boxes with the few things that felt genuinely mine. The rest I left behind because those items belonged to the person Vincent tried to create, not to me. My friend drove me to meet some people I hadn't seen in almost 2 years. I'd lost touch with them gradually during my marriage without realizing it was happening. We met at a coffee shop downtown, and I felt nervous walking through the door. They all stood up when they saw me and came over for hugs. We sat down and ordered drinks, and I didn't know where to start. One of them said they were glad I reached out because they'd been worried about me. Another said I seemed different the last time they saw me, but they figured marriage just changed people. I explained what Vincent had been doing with the gifts and the clothes and trying to turn me into his ex-girlfriend. They all looked shocked and said they noticed I'd started dressing differently, but thought I just developed new taste. One friend admitted she almost said something about how different I looked, but didn't want to seem judgmental about my style choices. I told them I wished someone had said something because I didn't see what was happening until it was too late. They apologized for not speaking up, and I said it wasn't their fault because Vincent made everything seem normal. We talked for hours about what I'd been through, and they shared stories about times they'd noticed small changes in me. One friend said I stopped suggesting restaurants I used to love, and always deferred to what Vincent wanted. Another remembered me canceling plans because Vincent had made other arrangements without asking me first. Hearing them describe these patterns made me realize how much control Vincent had gained over my life. They promised to help me remember who I was before Vincent, and invited me to start coming to their regular meetups again. My next therapy session focused on the guilt I felt about not recognizing the warning signs sooner. I sat in the comfortable chair and told my therapist I felt stupid for letting Vincent manipulate me for 2 years. She listened and then reminded me that manipulation works because it's designed to be subtle. She explained that Vincent was skilled at making his control seem like thoughtful attention and gift-giving. She said abusers spend time learning their victims' vulnerabilities and blind spots. Vincent knew I wanted to be a good wife and used that against me by framing his control as romance. My therapist helped me understand that recognizing manipulation while you're in it is nearly impossible because the manipulator shapes your perception of reality. She said the fact that I eventually saw through it and took action showed strength, not weakness. We worked on separating what happened from my feelings of shame about it. She reminded me that Vincent's actions were his responsibility, not mine. I started to feel less angry at myself and more focused on moving forward. I decided to start writing about what happened to me, because keeping it private felt wrong when other women might be experiencing similar things. I created an anonymous blog and wrote my first post about coercive control in relationships. I explained how Vincent systematically tried to turn me into his ex-girlfriend through gifts and style changes. I described how he made every controlling action seem like normal relationship behavior. I talked about the fake social media account, and how he tracked everything Tara posted so he could buy me identical items. I published the post late at night and didn't expect much response. The next morning, I had dozens of comments from women sharing their own stories. One woman said her boyfriend bought her the exact makeup his ex wore and got angry when she wanted to try different products. Another described how her husband slowly changed her wardrobe until she looked exactly like his first wife. The messages kept coming throughout the week. Women reached out privately to share experiences they'd never told anyone before. Some were still in relationships with partners who controlled their appearance and didn't know how to leave. Others had escaped but felt alone in their experience. Reading their stories made me realize how common this type of abuse was, and how rarely people talked about it. I started responding to comments and messages, offering support and resources. The blog became a space where women could share their experiences without judgment. Vincent's sister called me a few weeks after the mediation session. She said Vincent was actually attending therapy twice a week and taking it seriously. His counselor diagnosed him with obsessive tendencies related to abandonment issues from his childhood. She explained that Vincent's parents divorced when he was young and his mother moved away, which created deep fears about losing people he loved. The therapist was helping him understand how those fears turned into controlling behavior in his relationships. Vincent's sister said he was working on recognizing his patterns and learning healthier ways to process his emotions. She wanted me to know he was getting help, but also understood if I never wanted contact with him again. I told her I was glad Vincent was in therapy, but I needed to maintain my boundaries for my own healing. She said she understood completely and respected my decision. I appreciated her keeping me updated without expecting me to forgive Vincent or change my mind about the divorce. I went on my first date since filing for divorce on a Saturday evening. A coworker had set me up with someone she knew from her gym. We met at a restaurant I'd never been to before. He arrived right on time and smiled when he saw me. We sat down and ordered drinks, and he asked about my interests. I realized I didn't have a good answer because I'd spent 2 years doing what Vincent wanted, instead of exploring my own preferences. He noticed my hesitation and asked what I used to enjoy before my marriage. I told him about hiking trails I used to explore and art museums I loved visiting. He said those sounded great and asked if I'd been to the new exhibit downtown. I admitted I hadn't because Vincent never wanted to go to museums. My date suggested we could check it out together sometime if I was interested. The way he asked made it clear he wanted to know what I actually enjoyed, not what he thought I should like. He complimented my dress and said the color looked good on me. It was the first time in years someone praised my actual style instead of trying to change it. We talked about books and movies, and I found myself relaxing. When he asked about my work, he listened to my answers instead of redirecting the conversation to himself. The date ended with him asking if I wanted to meet again next week. I said yes and meant it. Paul sent me a text message a few days later asking how I was doing after that strange dinner party. He said he felt bad about leaving so quickly, but the whole situation with Vincent dressed exactly like him was too bizarre. I texted back that I completely understood and apologized for putting him in that uncomfortable position. He said he hoped I was okay, and asked if I'd left Vincent yet. I told him about the divorce proceedings, and he responded that he was glad I got out. We exchanged a few more messages about our lives since we dated. Paul was engaged now and working at a tech company downtown. He said his fiancée thought the whole Vincent situation was insane when he told her about it. I thanked him for being understanding and wished him well with his wedding plans. It felt good to have that conversation, and know there were no hard feelings about how I'd used him to make Vincent understand my experience. I booked a solo trip to a city I'd always wanted to visit, but never had the chance to see. Vincent never wanted to travel anywhere because Tara hadn't been interested in trips or vacations. Every time I suggested going somewhere new, he made excuses about work or money or timing. I realized I'd stopped suggesting travel entirely after the first year of marriage. Now I was free to go wherever I wanted. I chose a city with museums and good restaurants and interesting architecture. I bought plane tickets and booked a hotel room just for myself. The freedom to make that choice without asking permission or compromising felt revolutionary. I spent the week before the trip researching places I wanted to see and restaurants I wanted to try. My friends were excited for me and said I deserved to do something just for myself. The trip was still a few weeks away, but having it planned gave me something positive to focus on, while the divorce proceedings continued. My therapist and I started working on identifying my actual preferences versus things I'd adopted to please Vincent. She gave me homework assignments where I had to make choices about small things like what I wanted for breakfast or which movie I wanted to watch. It was harder than I expected because I'd spent so long performing someone else's identity. I caught myself wondering what Vincent would want me to choose before remembering that didn't matter anymore. My therapist said this was normal, and it would take time to reconnect with my authentic preferences. She had me start a journal where I wrote down things I genuinely enjoyed, without filtering through what Vincent or anyone else might think. The first few entries were difficult because I kept second-guessing myself. But slowly, I started remembering things I used to love before Vincent. I wrote about music I listened to in college and foods I enjoyed before Vincent started ordering for me at restaurants. Each entry felt like reclaiming a small piece of myself. Tara invited me to a gathering at her apartment with some of her friends. She sent the invitation through social media and said it was just a casual get-together with no pressure. I felt nervous about meeting new people as myself, instead of as Vincent's version of me. I almost declined, but decided I needed to start putting myself in social situations again. I showed up at her apartment on Friday evening wearing clothes I'd chosen myself. Tara answered the door and welcomed me inside. Her friends were warm and friendly and didn't ask invasive questions about my divorce. We talked about normal things like work and hobbies and travel plans. One of Tara's friends mentioned she was training for a marathon and asked if I liked running. I admitted I used to run but stopped after Vincent bought me those specific running shoes. She offered to go running with me sometime if I wanted to start again. Another friend talked about a book club she was starting and invited me to join. Nobody tried to change anything about me or make me feel like I needed to be different. The conversation flowed naturally, and I found myself laughing genuinely for the first time in weeks. Tara pulled me aside later and said she was glad I came. She told me her friends really liked me and wanted me to come to future gatherings. I thanked her for including me and said it meant a lot to have people accept me as I was. My boss called me into her office on a Monday morning and I worried something was wrong. She closed the door and asked me to sit down. Then she said she was promoting me to a senior position I'd been too distracted to pursue during my marriage. I was surprised because I didn't think anyone had noticed my work performance. She said she'd actually noticed me being more confident and engaged over the past few weeks. My boss explained that she'd seen me struggling before, but didn't want to pry into my personal life. Now that I seemed more focused, she wanted to give me opportunities I deserved. The promotion came with a salary increase and more responsibility. I thanked her and accepted immediately. Walking back to my desk, I felt proud of myself for the first time in years. This was something I'd earned through my own work, not something Vincent had given me or controlled. A few weeks later, my lawyer called to say Vincent had sent another letter through his attorney. She read it to me over the phone, and I could hear the familiar pattern of his words trying to make amends. His therapist apparently wanted him to apologize as part of his treatment program. The letter talked about his progress in therapy and how he was learning to recognize his controlling behaviors. He said he understood now that what he did was wrong, and he wanted to make things right. I listened to the whole thing without saying anything. When my lawyer finished reading, she asked how I wanted to respond. I told her to write back that I appreciated his efforts to get better, but I needed him to respect my boundary of no contact. She agreed that was the right approach and said she would send a formal response. The letter went in my file with all the other documentation from the divorce. I started going to a coffee shop near my apartment on weekends to work on my laptop. The place had good Wi-Fi and comfortable chairs, and I felt safe there. One Saturday morning, a guy around my age sat down at the table next to mine, and we ended up talking when he asked if I could watch his stuff while he got a refill. His name was Ely, and he worked in graphic design. We talked for almost an hour about random things like our favorite movies and places we wanted to travel. Before he left, he asked if I wanted to grab dinner sometime. I said yes without overthinking it. On our first date, Ely asked me what kind of food I liked and actually waited for my answer. I realized I had to think about it because Vincent had always ordered for me. I told Ely I used to love Thai food but hadn't had it in years. He took me to a Thai restaurant and let me choose everything I wanted from the menu. During dinner, he asked about my hobbies and interests and listened to every word I said. The difference between his approach and Vincent's was so obvious it almost made me cry. Ely didn't try to change anything about me or suggest I should dress differently or wear my hair a certain way. He seemed genuinely interested in who I actually was. After we had been dating for about a month, I invited Ely to meet Tara for coffee. I wanted him to meet the person who had helped me through everything. Tara brought her partner and the four of us sat together at a cafe downtown. Ely and Tara hit it off right away and started joking about how they were both dating women who had survived Vincent. Tara's partner laughed and said they should start a support group for people who dated Vincent's exes. The ability to laugh about what happened felt like real progress. I could talk about Vincent without feeling angry or ashamed anymore. Ely asked thoughtful questions about what we had been through and never made us feel like we were being dramatic or oversensitive. He told us we were both brave for leaving and rebuilding our lives. I decided to write one final blog post about my journey. I sat down at my computer and typed out everything from the beginning to where I was now. I wrote about being Vincent's project and slowly losing myself in his attempt to recreate Tara. I wrote about the revenge and the confrontation and the divorce. But mostly I wrote about reclaiming my identity and learning to trust my own choices again. I talked about therapy and friendship and dating someone who saw me as a real person. I posted it late at night and went to bed without checking the response. When I woke up the next morning, my inbox was full. Hundreds of women had commented, sharing their own stories of partners who tried to change them or mold them into someone else. Some had experienced the exact same thing with gifts and clothes. Others had different versions of identity erasure through constant criticism or controlling behavior. Reading their stories made me realize how common this was, and how many people suffered in silence. Women thanked me for putting words to their experiences and helping them understand they weren't crazy. A letter arrived in my mailbox with Vincent's mother's return address. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a handwritten note on nice stationery. She wrote that she had been thinking about me constantly since the divorce. She apologized for not teaching Vincent healthy relationship skills and for making excuses for his behavior over the years. She said she could see now that she had enabled his controlling tendencies by always defending him. The letter said she was proud of me for having the strength to leave and rebuild my life. She hoped I would find happiness with someone who truly appreciated me. I put the letter in my drawer with the other important documents from this whole experience. My therapist suggested I attend a support group for people recovering from coercive control relationships. I was nervous about going, but I forced myself to walk into the community center on a Tuesday evening. About 12 people sat in a circle and a facilitator welcomed me. Everyone introduced themselves and shared a little about their situations. I listened to stories that sounded so similar to mine, it was eerie. One woman talked about her ex-husband who criticized everything she wore until she only bought clothes he approved. Another described a boyfriend who slowly isolated her from all her friends. A man shared about his ex-wife who monitored his phone and email constantly. Hearing their stories helped me understand I wasn't alone, and what happened wasn't my fault. The facilitator explained that coercive control was a pattern of behavior designed to make victims doubt themselves and lose their independence. She said recognizing the pattern was the first step toward healing. Tara called me a few weeks later with an idea. The local women's center was looking for speakers to talk about relationship abuse, and she thought we should present together. I felt scared at first, but Tara convinced me that our combined perspective could help other women recognize the warning signs. We spent hours preparing our presentation about identity erasure in relationships. Tara talked about Vincent's early controlling behaviors during their relationship and how he tried to make her act like his high school girlfriend. I shared my experience of being systematically transformed into Tara's replacement. We created a list of red flags, including partners who buy gifts without asking preferences, who criticize your style constantly, who compare you to exes, and who try to control your appearance. The presentation went really well, and several women came up afterward to thank us. One woman said she recognized her current boyfriend's behavior in our description and planned to leave him. Another said she wished someone had warned her years ago before she married her controlling husband. Ely asked me to move in with him after we had been dating for 4 months. We were having dinner at his apartment, and he brought it up casually. He said he loved spending time with me and thought it would be nice to live together. I felt my stomach tighten with anxiety. I told him I needed more time to be sure of who I was independently first. I explained that I had spent 2 years being molded into someone else, and I was still figuring out my own identity. Ely nodded and said he completely understood. He told me there was no pressure and he would wait as long as I needed. He said my independence was important, and he never wanted me to feel like I had to change for him. His response without any guilt or manipulation confirmed he was different from Vincent. I felt grateful to be with someone who respected my boundaries without question. I ran into Vincent at the grocery store on a random Thursday afternoon. I was picking out vegetables in the produce section when I saw a man with a beard looking at tomatoes. Something about him seemed familiar, but I couldn't place it. He looked up and our eyes met, and I realized it was Vincent. He had grown a full beard and changed his whole style. He wore clothes I had never seen him in before, including a flannel shirt and jeans that looked nothing like his old wardrobe. He nodded politely at me from across the produce section, but didn't approach. I nodded back and continued shopping. My hands were shaking a little, but I felt okay. Vincent respecting my boundaries and not trying to talk to me felt like progress. I finished my shopping and left without seeing him again. Vincent's sister texted me a few days later asking if we could meet for coffee. I agreed because I had always liked her and she had been supportive during the divorce. We met at a cafe and she told me Vincent was dating someone new. I felt my chest tighten, but I stayed calm. She said Vincent was consciously working on accepting this woman as her own person, instead of trying to change her. He was apparently applying everything he learned in therapy to this new relationship. His sister said the therapy had made a real difference in how he approached dating and relationships. She wanted me to know because she thought I deserved to hear that Vincent was actually changing. I thanked her for telling me and said I hoped he continued getting help. Part of me felt relieved that maybe he wouldn't do to someone else what he did to me and Tara. I spent a Saturday afternoon going through the storage unit where I'd kept the last of Vincent's gifts in boxes. The red leather jacket sat on top, still in perfect condition, looking exactly like something Tara would wear. I pulled out the tennis bracelet, the perfume bottles, the running shoes, all the items that were supposed to transform me into someone else. Loading everything into my car felt lighter than I expected. The donation center worker helped me unload box after box, thanking me for the generous contribution. Driving away from that storage unit, I realized I didn't need to hold on to physical reminders of what Vincent had done. Those items belonged to a version of myself that didn't exist anymore. My new partner noticed the change in me immediately when we met for dinner that evening. I told him about donating everything, and he reached across the table to squeeze my hand. He said he was proud of me for taking that step. Over the next few weeks, I found myself sharing more about what I actually wanted instead of waiting to see what he preferred first. When he asked where I wanted to go for vacation, I suggested a beach destination I'd always dreamed of visiting. He booked the trip without hesitation, excited to experience something I genuinely cared about. At a furniture store, I pointed out a couch I liked in a bold color, half expecting him to suggest something more neutral. Instead, he said it was perfect, and we should get it. Every small moment where he celebrated my choices instead of trying to change them made me trust him more. My therapist suggested I write a letter to my younger self during our next session. She explained that putting my experience into words for someone who hadn't lived it yet might help me see how far I'd come. I sat at my kitchen table that night with a blank page, thinking about what I would tell the woman who first met Vincent. The letter started with a warning about perfume that smelled too familiar, and gifts that seemed thoughtful but felt wrong. I wrote about red flags I'd dismissed, about how love shouldn't require becoming someone else, about trusting the uncomfortable feeling in my gut when something didn't add up. Reading it back made me cry, not from sadness, but from recognition of how much I'd learned. My therapist kept the letter in my file and said revisiting it in 6 months would show me even more growth. Tara called me on a Wednesday afternoon with news that made her voice shake with happiness. She was engaged. Her partner had proposed during a weekend trip, creating a moment that was completely about who she actually was. She asked if I would be in her wedding, and I said yes immediately. The idea of celebrating her finding real love after everything we'd both survived with Vincent felt important. She sent me photos of her ring, and we talked about wedding plans, laughing about how different this felt from the relationships we'd escaped. Being part of her special day seemed like the perfect way to honor our friendship that grew from shared pain. The wedding took place on a sunny Saturday at a garden venue Tara had always loved. I stood with the other bridesmaids, wearing a dress Tara had chosen because she thought the color would look good on me, not because it matched someone else's style. During the reception, I found myself talking to 3 other women who gathered near the dessert table. One mentioned she'd recently left a relationship where her boyfriend constantly criticized her appearance. Another shared that her ex had tried to change everything about her, from her hair to her hobbies. The third woman said her former partner had compared her to his ex constantly, making her feel like a replacement. We exchanged phone numbers and talked about meeting monthly to support each other. Finding other women who understood identity erasure in relationships made me feel less alone. My partner had been acting nervous for a week before he finally took me to the park where we'd had our first date. He'd set up a picnic with all my actual favorite foods, not items he thought I should like. When he pulled out a ring, he talked about loving exactly who I was, including the parts of myself I was still discovering. He said he never wanted me to change for him, and he hoped I'd marry him as the real me. I said yes, feeling certain for the first time that someone saw me as a complete person, not a project or replacement. The ring he chose reflected my actual style, something I'd pointed out months earlier without realizing he was paying attention. At Tara's reception, she asked me to give a toast. I stood up with my glass, looking at all the guests who'd come to celebrate her happiness. I talked about meeting Tara under unusual circumstances, about how we'd both experienced relationships that tried to erase who we were. I said the unexpected gift from our shared difficult experience was finding a genuine friendship built on understanding and support. I told the room that watching Tara marry someone who loved her for exactly who she was felt like proof that we'd both healed. By the time I finished, several people were wiping their eyes, and Tara hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. A card arrived at my apartment a few days later, forwarded through Vincent's sister. The envelope had my name written in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside, Vincent had written a brief message congratulating me on my engagement. The note was appropriate and respectful, with no attempts to explain himself or ask for forgiveness. He simply wished me happiness and signed his name. His sister texted separately to say Vincent had asked her to pass along the card because he wanted to respect my boundaries by not contacting me directly. The fact that he'd learned to give me space without making it about his feelings showed real progress. Planning my own wedding became an exercise in choosing everything I actually wanted. My partner asked what kind of ceremony I envisioned and told me his only request was seeing me happy. I picked a venue because I loved it, not because it matched some ideal or trend. I chose flowers that smelled amazing to me, colors that made me smile, music that reflected my taste. Every decision felt revolutionary after years of having my preferences dismissed or redirected. My partner celebrated each choice, asking questions about why I liked certain things and remembering details I mentioned in passing. The freedom to plan something completely authentic to who I was still felt almost too good to be true. My therapist reviewed my progress during our next session, looking through notes from our first meeting months ago. She said the transformation in how I talked about myself was remarkable. I'd gone from questioning my own judgment to trusting my instincts. She pointed out that I now expressed my wants clearly instead of waiting for others to decide for me. She said I was ready to graduate from weekly sessions to occasional check-ins when I needed support. Hearing that I'd done the work to reclaim my identity and rebuild my confidence made me realize how far I'd actually come from the woman who wore Tara's perfume and questioned her own sanity. On my wedding day, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the bridal suite and saw myself staring back. The dress I'd chosen had a simple silhouette with delicate beading along the neckline, nothing like the elaborate gown Tara had worn in photos I'd seen years ago. My hair fell in loose waves around my shoulders because I liked how it felt, not because anyone told me it looked good. The makeup artist had listened when I said I wanted natural tones that made me feel comfortable, and the result was a face I recognized as mine. Every detail from the pearl earrings my mother gave me to the flat shoes I picked because heels hurt my feet reflected choices I made freely. I touched the fabric of my dress and felt proud of the woman looking back at me, someone who knew what she wanted and wasn't afraid to choose it. The ceremony took place in a small garden I'd fallen in love with during a random weekend walk, surrounded by people who knew the real me and celebrated her. Tara sat in the third row wearing a blue dress that suited her perfectly, and during the reception she pulled me aside for a photo. We stood with our arms around each other, both of us smiling genuine smiles that had nothing to do with performing for anyone else. She joked about sending Vincent a copy with a note saying we were both thriving without his control, and we laughed until our sides hurt. The photographer captured that moment of pure joy between two women who'd survived the same manipulation and come out stronger. My husband found me later on the dance floor and pulled me close, whispering that he loved watching me discover new interests and hobbies. He said my willingness to try new things and change my mind made me fascinating, and he never wanted me to stop growing into whoever I was becoming. The contrast with Vincent's need to keep me frozen as a replacement for someone else hit me hard. This man wanted me to evolve and change, to be unpredictable and surprising, to become more myself instead of less. I looked around the reception at faces of friends who'd watched me transform from Vincent's project back into my own person, at Tara laughing with her partner, at my parents dancing together after 40 years of marriage. The happiness I felt wasn't about the wedding or the dress or even my new husband, though I loved all those things. It came from being completely comfortable in my own skin, surrounded by people who loved the real me without trying to change a single thing. Vincent's attempt to erase my identity had backfired in the most beautiful way possible, forcing me to claim myself more strongly than I ever had before. I wouldn't change how things turned out because his manipulation led me to this moment of absolute certainty about who I was and what I deserved.